All right, we are live. Okay, guys, so I'm gonna give it a second to go live. Let everybody see that I'm live. Let some people come in here and hear the couple of stories I have lined up here. And while I'm doing that, I just want to welcome anybody that's new here to the channel. You're watching Kyle's Cars, where I use my experience to make videos for you so you can learn about the things that I've done, the things that I know, and hopefully will help you save money or avoid issues in the future. Whether you already have a lot of experience, you can always learn from somebody else, or whether you have no experience at all and want to get into this business for yourself, make some money, or just work on your own car and save some money rather than paying a shop. I'm here to help you guys with any of that. So I just want to get into a couple of quick stories. The first story I have to tell you guys, it actually comes from one of my first shops I ever worked in. It was a place where we worked mostly on like heavy equipment type things, stuff like semi-trucks, forestry equipment, skidders, some excavators, all those types of things. And at one point I had worked on a trailer that it's commonly referred to as a low bed or a low boy. These trailers are used for moving heavy equipment, that type of thing, and I actually have a video of the exact one that I worked on, so I'm going to go ahead and show you that while I continue the story. So this trailer, as you can probably see in the video, the way that it worked was it can drop the whole deck, as you're seeing here, and I believe the particular one I worked on slid the axles forward when you did it, but it was very similar to this, and you could load heavy equipment onto it, stuff like construction equipment, or even cars, pretty much anything you need onto the body of this trailer. And the guy that owned it had completely disassembled it so that he could have it painted. So yeah, so as you can see here in the video, the axles are moving. That's exactly the same as the one that I worked on. Actually, I think it's the same make and model as the one I was working on. Anyway, they had completely disassembled this thing, pulled everything out of it, pulled all the air lines, all the hydraulic lines, everything. They were going to redo it brand new after it was painted. They had painted theirs black. I think that these are available in black from the factory. Just the particular one we're looking at was painted red. But the one I was working on actually was black. They had taken all the wood off of it and everything. And the owner of it owned a pretty good sized towing company in the town that I lived in. Had more than one of these trailers, had a bunch of wheels, tires, parts, everything for these. So he had disassembled it, loaded it onto a different trailer, and hauled it to a place to be completely painted after it was disassembled. Then had it sent to the shop I worked at to be reassembled with new hoses and everything. And so we received all these parts, and it was a couple of us that worked on it, but one of the things I did was I put the hubs together, so the brakes, all the bearings, everything, and I installed the wheels. And I had noticed when I went to install the wheels, first of all, the wheels on this thing are 19.5 wheels, which most like semi trucks have 22.5s. That's the diameter of the wheels. So you have like a 15-inch, a 16-inch. So most semi trucks are 22.5-inch tall wheels, but some lighter duty stuff is 19.5-inch, and that's what this trailer has on it. And I had noticed when I was going to put the wheels on that they weren't all exactly the same, but I didn't really think anything of it. I just put it all together. Everything was torqued down to spec, all that. And I think I can't remember if we put the decking boards on it or if the guy had his own shop do it. He had a shop and his own mechanics that he has that he had as employees. And I can't remember which one of us put the decking boards on. I know it wasn't me personally. And that thing ran up and down the road for probably a couple weeks. And then one day, the thing that nobody wants to see happen happened. This thing pulled back in, this trailer pulled back into our garage that we worked at, and they had one of the axles chained up. So because it has dual axles on it, he had the front axle chained up so it wasn't on the ground. And I was pulling this thing in, and he said that the wheels started shaking violently, and he stopped, and they were completely loose. What happened was the two wheels, because they're dual wheels, when they go together, the valve stem had gotten in the way. So even though I had tightened it up, it was pushing against one of the valve stems, and nobody caught it. And when it went down the road, the whole thing wasn't quite lined up properly, and it shook a lot, and the lug nuts all loosened up from the violent shaking, and they didn't notice because it's all the way back on the trailer. It ruined the whole hub, ruined all the lug studs, ruined the wheels for sure, and it was a pretty embarrassing thing for me. I mean, this was one of the first places I worked at. I was not good. I was definitely embarrassed. You know, it was a mistake that I learned from, I suppose. Now I know you shouldn't mix and match wheels like that when you're running duals on a truck. So probably a lot of you guys won't really run into this, but it was definitely like a moment that I personally learned from, so I thought it was worth sharing with you guys and talking about. So something else later on, more recently, actually not super long ago, you guys that watch the channel probably know that I had taken a job working for an RV dealership, and there was a day I was working there, and somebody had traded in their old travel trailer camper. You know, it's not a very big one, in for a newer version of almost the same exact thing. And they you know, left with it and went down to wherever they park it at. They basically live in their camper, but you know, not because, you know, they don't have money for a house. It's just the lifestyle that they like. And when they had it delivered, because they didn't even have a truck to haul it, they literally park it in one spot and just leave it there. So they had worked it into a deal where the company delivered the camper to their site, which was all the way down probably about 2.5 hours away from the dealership itself, which isn't totally uncommon. You see that from time to time. And during the process of delivering it, one of the propane lines had fallen off the bottom of this thing and dragged down the highway and ruined it, and they wanted to get that fixed, but because they had to have it delivered, they didn't have a way to bring it back to the dealership to get service. So I ended up having to go out there and fix this thing, and it wasn't, and so I was kind of told what it was, knew it wasn't too big of a deal. It was going to take me longer to get there and back, especially. Going each way was going to take longer than fixing it would. So I get down there to the place that it's supposed to be, and there's this big gate, like a big green gate. And the place is called Whitetail. I don't really know much about it. And I have to go up to this intercom system on the outside of the gate and tell the person, hey, you know, I'm here from such and such RV. I gotta come work on so and so's camper. And they said, okay, just go straight up to the office so you can sign in. I was thinking to myself, Man, this is a pretty secure campground. You know, it's kind of in the middle of nowhere. I'm surprised that they've got these big gates around it. And so uh, I get into the place and I start to realize that this place is a nudist colony. Not too big of a deal, you know. I've seen naked people before, and not really sure what to expect, but you know, I'm trying to act professional as much as possible. And I get up to the office, and this real short guy, not super short, I'd probably say he was about 5'6", 5'7", but pretty short guy, pretty flamboyant, comes out really energetic, and he is naked as a jaybird. He is completely naked. He comes running out of the office. Older guy, probably in his mid to late 60s, and he's got a couple piercings in his face, but he's older, and he's definitely light in the loafers. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but you know, he was definitely, you know, had some sugar in the tank, if you know what I'm saying. And he's telling me whatever, but I'm having a really hard time paying attention to what he's trying to tell me, because something is shining in my eye from downwards, and I'm trying really hard, because I know that he's naked. I'm trying really hard to look at this guy in the face. I'm trying my best, but finally, whatever it was caught the sunlight just right, and it shined me right in the face, and I had to look and see. I didn't know that I was hoping it was like a coin on the ground or something, and I looked down, and this fella, he didn't have any. He was just all sack. He didn't have anything else. He just had a sack down there and a little bit of flesh on top of it, but nothing else. And through that little tiny piece of flesh was about, you know, a piercing in it about as thick as my pinky. It just stuck right through this piece of flesh. I don't know if this guy got into an accident somehow and lost his, you know, his, you know what, and you know, was trying to live with it, decided that being a nudist was going to be the only way you come to terms with it. I don't know, but it was gone, or I don't know if it was ever there in the first place, but it wasn't there. And I tried my best to hold it together. I was like working really hard not to go, whoa, what is this? I was able to hold it together. I was a little bit unnerved. I was a little bit freaked out. Not gonna lie. I mean, you don't expect to see that. You go out to fix a camper, you don't expect to see that. It was messed up, man. That guy was in bad shape. And you know, I went over to the thing, and you know, on the way, you know, not everybody there was real old, but nobody there was real young. That's for sure. And yeah, the people that owned it were nudists. You know, it's kind of weird talking to a customer that is naked. It's not common that you do that, but yeah, that's what that's pretty much what happened there. Another thing that happened to me, probably not as interesting as the last story I just told, but another thing that happened to me is I worked at a junkyard for a while in this area, and what I ultimately ended up doing for them was I worked on a lot of their equipment. They had like car crushers there. They had front end loaders, all that kind of thing. All the stuff that you see at a junkyard. A lot of heavy equipment, and I worked on a lot of it. And so I'm trying to think where I start, because, you know, being at a junkyard, there are probably quite a few stories I could tell. Well, the very first day I worked there, they assign everybody a car to get around, because it's just easy. Like, they get cars in there all the time that still run. They might not be roadworthy, but they're good enough for, you know, cruising around a junkyard, getting from spot to spot. And the only car that they had at the time that ran that they could give to me was a Mustang convertible. It was an all-black Mustang convertible, and it actually wasn't in bad shape, and it ran fine. I don't know how it ended up in the junkyard. It was like probably like a 2001, 2002 fully loaded, leather, everything. I mean, it would be a perfectly fine car to drive down the road as far as I could tell without jacking it up and really looking underneath it, but it ran fine. And I would drive around, and this place, this junkyard had a section that was open to the public where like people could go and take parts off of the cars themselves and buy the parts. And everywhere I would go in this car, people would be trying to ask me if they could take a part off it. And I'm like, no, you can't take anything off it. I got to use it for now anyway. It'll be back here soon, as soon as I find something a little bit more practical for these purposes. But for now, you can't take anything off of it. And then there was like one day I left this thing sitting there when I was working on something, and one of these customers came up and started taking the trunk off of it. Well, the trunk is where I kept all the tools, you know, so like when I go to like a car crusher or something, like I'd put my tools back there. They had gotten in there and started taking the trunk off of this car, and they got down to like the last bolt, and I caught them, and they like argued with me. They like gave me a hard time about it. I'm like, you can't, I work here, you can't take this, you gotta leave it, man. Luckily, I got, you know, I finally got something different that wasn't as desirable. I think I started using like a little pickup truck, but man, that was a real pain. But then there was another time they had this little skid steer there, you know, like a Bobcat type of deal. It was it's really a skid steer, but had rubber tires on it. And this guy came and was using it, but he hadn't used it before. And when it came time to put fuel in this machine, he asked somebody, hey, how do I get fuel into this machine? And somebody told him, you know, okay, we have a big tank over there. So where they had the fuel tank, they had like a regular, probably like 1,000-gallon round fuel tank with like a gas nozzle on it, just like you see at a gas station, but there's a tank there. And then next to that, there's another like a IBC tote, like a big plastic tote that had DEF. So DEF is diesel exhaust fluid. It's used for like the emission systems on newer diesel equipment. And it also has something similar to like a gas nozzle, but it's blue. And they're like right next to each other. But it's pretty clear which nozzle goes to which. He went over there and he didn't know which one to use, so he grabbed the blue nozzle and put it in the fuel tank and filled it from almost empty all the way to the top. And, takes off with it, starts using it. And I think it ran for a while after he did that, because it had to pump out all the fuel out of the lines and, a little bit out of the bottom of the tank, because it was pretty close to empty anyway. And then all of a sudden it started smoking and sputtering and spewing, and finally it just died. It wouldn't run anymore. And he said he knew that he had probably used the wrong thing, and he told me, it stopped working. I don't know why. It just started doing this and that, and I just filled it up with fuel. And I said, did you use the right thing? Did you use that nozzle? He goes, no, I used the blue nozzle. It's like, yeah, well, you just filled it with diesel exhaust fluid. And he goes, oh, what is that? I said, well, it won't run on it. So, yeah, he was in a good amount of trouble. I ended up pretty much taking and using a siphon hose to drain the DEF out of the tank. That took a good little while because it was filled from bottom to top with exhaust fluid. Then I did my best to drain out any residual DEF out of the lines, starting off by, there's like a drain on the bottom of the fuel filter. I ran the lift pump trying to pump out through the filter. Then I put that back together, changed the filter, and I drained it off, drained the pressure off the injectors a little bit, not too much, because there's thousands and thousands of pounds of pressure in there. But I went ahead and I did that. So pretty much dried out the system, filled it up with fuel, and a couple shots of ether later, it did start. It ran really smoky for a while, even after all that. But as far as I know, it still runs good to this day. But yeah, that wasn't a very good thing at all. That place, man, they had some weird ways of doing things. For instance, they had all these loaders, and they would, rather than like keeping the areas clean of debris, more debris than has to be there, they would just like let the tires get punctured all the time by like pieces of scrap metal, and then keep filling up the tires all the time until eventually it gets annoying, and then you have to take the tires off, and you have 5-6 places you had to patch this loader tire. And patching one loader tire is not a small task. For anybody that's ever done it before, you probably should know. Yeah, it's a real pain in the ass. Because these loaders, these pieces of heavy equipment, they have these like split rim type of things, where it's kind of like, it reminds me of like almost like a bud wheel or something, where you the wheel has a flange and a locking ring on one side of it. So if you need to swap a tire, you need to do whatever, you can take and put pressure down on the tire with another machine or whatever, and you can undo this big ring, this big snap ring that holds this flange, that holds that one side of the bead onto the wheel, which isn't the most horrible thing, if you got some heavy equipment. But if you only got like one loader, forget it. It ain't happening, man. But yeah, and then you gotta like sit there and grind out the inside of this tire, grind all the rubber out of it. It's horrible. It really sucks. Here's a good one that is just purely my fault. If you guys want to have a laugh at me, I suppose. One time I was working on a dump truck, and the cylinder for the body, because a dump truck has like a big fat cylinder that lifts the body to dump everything out of it. The cylinder on the body of this dump truck was leaking, and so we're going to have to repack this cylinder. So essentially, a hydraulic cylinder works by, it has a big piston in it, and on the piston there's these fiber packing on the ends of it that seals the fluid on either side so that it can work properly under pressure. But as time goes on, that fiber wears out, and it has to be replaced. It's usually like years and years and years of use that, in between these things happening, but it does happen over time. And a dump body cylinder is like a multi-stage cylinder. So if you ever like seen like an antenna for like a cell phone or something back in the day, or like a radio antenna, where like you pull out one part of it and it'll slide all the way to the end, and then it'll start to pull out a second part, slide that, so on and so forth. So that's the way this dump truck was. It had like 3 sections in that cylinder. So it had one big section, so it'd start there, run that to the end, and then another smaller section would come out, so on and so forth. I think it had 3 total. So we had taken this cylinder off by basically, we took a forklift and tied a strap, like a lifting strap, to part of the cylinder, while using like a small, like an old school pettibone crane. It's like old. But we took this crane and we lifted the body with the hydraulic lines disconnected from the cylinder. We lifted the body a little bit. Then we took a forklift, drove up beside the truck, and tied the cylinder to the forks on this forklift so we could lift this cylinder. Probably the cylinder has to weigh at least 300 to 500 pounds, maybe closer to 3 with no hydraulic fluid in it. But so we got it out and repacked it, and then when we went to put it back in, I was on this forklift, and you got to get the cylinder in just the right spot. So there's like a little bit of space between the cab and the body, especially when the body's lifted up with this crane the way it was. And so I was trying to get it lined up, and there was another guy standing in what would traditionally be the catwalk area of, like, if it were just a regular tractor trailer truck, but this was a dump truck, so it didn't really have a catwalk. But he was standing in that general area because that's where that cylinder goes. while I was trying to get this all, the cylinder lined up in the spot that he wanted. And I'm finding, like, as I'm trying to line this forklift up, I'm like having a lot of trouble, like, getting it quite right. Like, it feels like there's something in the way. And I'm like, what the heck is going on? Well, what had happened was so like, say that this was the body of the truck, this is the cab of the truck. So you have the space in between that the cylinder has to go. So I had lined up the forks. So like if I'm coming at it like this, I lined up the forks so that the fork closer to the body had the cylinder on it, so I could kind of swing it in there. And so I'm pulling up and I'm trying to get it in there, and it's just like the forklift doesn't want to move, it feels like. And then somebody yells to me. It turns out that the fork that didn't have the cylinder loaded on it was hitting the back of the cab of the truck, like pushing against where the door frame meets the side of the cab. And I mean, it didn't damage the truck that bad, but it could have been pretty much worse. I mean, it could have broken a window or anything, and that would have been pretty embarrassing. I mean, it was embarrassing the way it was. Another thing that I did, just stupid and inexperienced, we used to use 50-gallon drums to dispose of hydraulic hoses. When people would come in, the place I worked at had all the stuff to make hydraulic hoses right there on site. And so when they would make a new hose, they would dispose of the old hoses all in this big 50-gallon drum. And then once it got full, they would take that whole drum to the scrapyard. And apparently the scrapyard was willing to accept it. Even though like hydraulic hoses have a ton of rubber on them, they are steel on the inside. So they were willing to accept these drums. So the way that they got these drums is they would be empty, but you know, if you ever looked at like a 50-gallon steel drum, there's only like a couple small holes on it. And you know, normally the holes don't have anything in them. When we got them, they were emptied out and the caps were off them already. So I would go at them with an acetylene torch and cut the lid all the way around, except for like maybe like a couple inches, so you could just lift it open like a soup can, fill it up, and then bend the lid back down and weld a couple little tabs of steel so that the barrel would stay closed with all these hoses in it. So one day I went to go and cut open this barrel, and I saw that the caps were still on it, and I thought about it for a second, but not really thinking too hard about it. I was like, I wonder if I should take these caps off. And so I try to take the cap off of it, and I'm even hitting the cap with like a little hammer and like a chisel trying to turn this cap. But then I finally decided this is too difficult. Maybe they don't come off because they're rusted shut. Maybe that's why they're still on the barrel. And so I was like, whatever, it won't matter. Once I make a hole in it with the torch, you know, it'll be open anyway. And that only takes like a split second to get a hole in there with the torch. So I take this barrel, and I'm just outside of the bay door with the torch, about heating it up, like just about to put a hole through the top. And so I heat it up just a little bit, because with a torch you get the metal like red hot first, which takes like no time with a thin barrel like that, and then you hit the oxygen and it'll start to cut. So like literally 1 second you're just giving it a little bit of heat, then hit that and you're about to go. And as soon as I hit that, I just heard a boom, and the barrel was gone, like completely gone. And I was like standing there with the torch still in my hand. The torch got blown out, so like the flame on the torch was off, and I'm standing there like, where'd the barrel go? And then no sooner than I just hear this barrel come down and crash. The barrel had shot way up in the air. I didn't even see it in the air. It shot way up in the air and just came slamming back down on the ground. And when it came back down on the ground, it didn't even look like a barrel anymore. It looked like a Tylenol pill or something. It was like round on either side, like almost like one of those Beats pill speakers, but a 50-gallon barrel size. It just for whatever reason, like it had oil or something in it, and that little bit of heat, as soon as it got a little bit of oxygen in there with it, it just had some type of reaction inside the barrel, and that pressure had nowhere to go, so it just expanded inside, and because it only had like a little tiny pinhole at that point, and so it just expanded inside and just pushed the barrel up in the air. So yeah, if you're ever going to cut holes in steel barrels or any other type of vessel that can hold some kind of pressure, you need to make sure that you have the caps off it first. That way, you won't have anything building up in there as you're trying to cut it. That was kind of scary because it would have sucked if that thing came back down on my head, which is a legitimate possibility because I didn't even know it was up in the air. I was standing there shocked, like not even sure what to think. So but yeah, so we're going on over a half hour now. Had a couple people watching, and I appreciate everybody that watched. If you're new here, or if you're watching this after I'm live as like archived an archived video, go ahead and hit the subscribe button. I figure if you have watched long enough, like this long, and can stand my stories and my voice this much, you might as well just go ahead and subscribe and hit the like button. And yeah, I guess I'll catch you guys in the next one. See you later.